Today I'm going to talk a little bit about immigration and multiculturalism here in Europe and its effects. Now, I see a contradiction within the economic system here in Europe. Free market capitalism promotes immigration, especially to richer countries from poorer countries, as a source of cheap labour, but it cannot support or provide employment for an enlarged population, which in turn leads to increased impoverishment amongst the general population of that country, both foreign and domestic. Now, people are drawn to Europe for many reasons. There are more job opportunities here, better education, a safer and more secure lifestyle. The list goes on. And the fact is that compared to many other places in the world, Europe is a great place to live. I'll admit that I've only been outside of Europe once, but I love Europe and I love being European. I believe in an integrated federal pan-European state, preferably of a socialist nature, and in the unity of European workers as a force for good in helping the world develop. There are, however, those, especially on the right, who see Europe as being under threat from immigration and multiculturalism, and that the mainstream governments are supporting this at the expense of European or national culture and identity. So I want to try and have a look at the different types of immigrants for a moment. There are the people who move to Europe because they want to, because they admire European culture, they want to find a nice spot to live, or if they're looking to start a business, or looking for things they can invest in. And there are those who move not because they want to leave their home country, but because they feel they have to find work that they can't find in their own country, to escape war or famine or genocide, because they feel unsafe in their home countries. Again, these people can also be divided into those who intend to stay on a permanent basis and those who wish to stay temporarily until the situation at home improves or they finish whatever they wanted to do in Europe. Now, while these categories do seem to cross the class lines, I'd say that in both, the working class of foreign nations tends to fit into the latter, in that they do not wish to stay permanently, but they feel they have to leave their own country, and as soon as they feel they are able to, they probably wish to return. And one of the controversial issues surrounding immigration is integration, i.e. the degree to which a foreigner adapts to and takes on the traditional culture and lifestyle and behaviours of the country in which they are staying. Now, as I mentioned in my last video, I've had an experience as living as an expatriate for many years in Spain, and one lesson that I drew from that experience is that if you immigrate to a foreign country, it's essential that you take steps to integrate yourself with that society. I knew so many English people in Spain who did not learn Spanish, they did not talk to Spanish people, they went to their own schools, they ate in their own restaurants, they basically avoided interaction with the native Spanish population at all costs. And this is what not to do when living in a foreign country. It alienates the native populace from the foreign one, who feel like their culture, and they feel like their culture is being rejected. And it gives rise to myth about the governments and their relationship with the foreign group, i.e. myths that they're giving them preferential treatment, or whatever. And that feeds nationalist extremism. It also makes life harder for the government and creates a negative stereotype about the group. Now, while one has the right to be taught in their own language if possible, it is important that the native language is learnt too, and just generally because it's a useful skill to have, to be bilingual, and it would be a wasted opportunity if you didn't. Now, another reason for integration is that insular and isolated foreign communities will form its own negative stereotypes about the native population as a result of being alienated, leading to both communities distrusting each other, harbouring ignorant assumptions about each other, and, as we all too often see, outright hostility. So why do some communities remain isolated from mainstream society? Perhaps it's a preference for that which reminds them of home, or it could be suspicion or hostility towards mainstream society, or a rejection of its values on religious grounds. Now, division and hostility, especially along ethnic lines, will inevitably lead to violence, which will escalate. with the eye for an eye mentality, which is attached to violence of a racial nature. Therefore, integration is essential to the maintenance of a harmonious society, as is mutual understanding of different cultures in order to dispel myths and enhance cooperation. A balance must be struck between maintaining one's own culture and integrating into a society with a different culture. And this does include giving up some cultural practices which are considered completely unacceptable to Western secular society, such as forced marriages, honour killing, and female circumcision. As again, that reinforces a kind of a negative stereotype and harms integration. Now, multiculturalism and immigration controversies are also greatly affected by the economic situation in the country. For example, Russia, which is a very multi-ethnic state, I believe it has over 80 different recognised ethnicities, suffered from a severe economic crisis in the early 90s following the collapse of the Soviet Union and a poorly managed return to free market capitalism and excessive privatisation. Huge wealth was lost, thousands were instantly made redundant, social safety nets were removed, and life became very hard for many Russians. The capitalist system of competition becomes vicious in those situations, and that competition again often leads to conflict along ethnic lines, which was fueling far-right sentiment, high youth unemployment, a lack of political representation for the youth, and a perception that foreigners were stealing Russian jobs and causing problems in Russian society led to a shocking rise in racism in that country. And now Russia is home to 85,000 neo-Nazis. Violent attacks against people of a non-ethnic Russian background are incredibly frequent. Due to intense competition for jobs, xenophobia, and a government that seems uninclined to step in and help resolve these social problems. And in the UK too, hostility or negative feelings surrounding immigration and multiculturalism have risen as a result of the financial crisis. While nowhere near as severe as in Russia, the fact is high unemployment, the presence of foreign businesses and workers, and hysteria about the threat of foreign communities that apparently pose to British culture has given rise to anti-foreigner sentiments of the far right, and it's given those sentiments a sense of legitimacy in the eyes of many of the working class. And being unemployed during an economic crisis can be an incredibly frustrating experience, leading to depression, anxiety and anger. And it's easy to see why many, especially in places like London with large amounts of foreign workers and businesses, disenfranchised people would make the connection between the presence of these foreigners and their own economic woes, especially if they are unfamiliar with the inner workings of the capitalist system. Immigrants are an easy scapegoat, partly due to their visibility. I mean, you go into any shop, cafe or restaurant in London, you're very likely to be served by a foreign person, so they're very visible. And then myths are created that all immigrants steal jobs, that they want to take over the country and establish Sharia law, that they are against us, etc., etc. But beware this path, for it leads only to fascism. The capitalism is driven partly by cheap labour. Foreign workers not integrated with the native workers' movement are susceptible to exploitation, as they are sometimes willing to work for less than is considered reasonable or normal. So that's another reason why integration is important, to help migrant workers find suitable work and employment without exploitation. In a system driven by profit, a race to the bottom is unavoidable, and an increased and highly competitive labour pool is good for profit and for cheap labour, as it can easily be divided by exacerbating ethnic or religious tensions, meaning that instead of opposing the bourgeois class and opposing capitalism, the workers fight each other on the basis of race and culture. And shrinking job market and increasing labour pool under capitalism is the ideal environment for rightist thinking to take root and gain support. Our differences will be exploited, our culture invoked, existential threats will be plucked from thin air in order to divide us, to mislead us and to carry out the agenda for those who wish to exploit the working people to gain power for themselves and their own twisted vision of society. A process of integration and mutual understanding is therefore essential if we are to create class unity, the class unity we need to face off such a threat. The political situation of the last decade has obviously had its part to play too. I mean, the war on terror has created an immense fear of foreigners, or non-whites. With propaganda about Islamic terrorism shoved down our throats 24/7, people will begin to find it hard to differentiate between the Islamic extremists and ordinary Muslims, and see them as a threat and act accordingly. And when, like a self-fulfilling prophecy, on the 7th of July 2005, 4 alienated young British-born Muslims blew themselves up on London's transport system. The media attention on Muslims has led to a sense of them being persecuted or singled out in their community, with their loyalties questioned as a result of the foreign policy of this government and the response from the Islamists internationally. So, again, it just creates further conflict and further division in our societies. Now, the fact is, immigration will continue into Europe. People living in intolerable situations will always leave in search of a better life. The capitalist system requires that they do this to ensure their survival, and these people are not to blame. The vast majority are not looking to harm their future homes. You go where the money is. You don't hate the player, hate the game. The economic crisis has created an elevated sense of competition for work, and the far-right xenophobic reaction is a symptom of capitalism in decline. Unless the working class takes power and builds an economy suited for meeting their needs, it shall deepen, and the differences in our cultures will be used to further divide us and cause conflict for the benefit of the ruling classes. In the third world too, the working class must seek power to build a people's economy, to strengthen and develop their homelands into safe and secure places to live, prosperous and orientated towards the working class. Multiculturalism can work. Immigration can be beneficial, but under failing capitalism it will not achieve its goals. We must pursue solidarity with foreign workers, integrate them into our society, our workers' movement, and our struggle against capitalism and fascism, and be undeterred by the jeers of the reactionary right. Our struggle is international, and our outlook too must be international.